right. Is this Mr. Halderson?
Correct, Commissioner. This is Mr. Halderson, Chandler Halderson.
Okay.
I'm going to be appearing with Mr. Halderson, and I just wanted him to know that no charges have yet been filed.
Okay, and yep, I was going to point out that there's no complaint that's been filed. This is simply a bond hearing based on the probable cause statement. And Attorney Doral, have you received that or reviewed the probable cause statement?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Halderson, we don't have an address for you, or Attorney Doral. Do you have an address that we could use for Mr. Halderson?
Well, his address is 4595 Oak Springs Circle, Windsor, Wisconsin 53532.
All right, and I think he was nodding his head that that's where he's staying. Okay. All right, and Attorney Brown is appearing on behalf of the state, correct?
Correct.
All right, and Attorney Brown, obviously it's pointed out there isn't a complaint that has been filed yet, but the state is still looking for a request to address bond and address filing the complaint at a later date. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, Attorney Brown, what's the state's request in regards to bond?
Sure. First, I'll say that I think the state can probably be in a good position to get a complaint filed with some amount of charges by Thursday. I am going to be requesting a significant cash bail. So I would ask cash bail until then be set in the amount of $1 million. It's an interesting request, and I understand it's a high amount based on the charges the defendant was booked into jail on. However, this is a very unique situation that the court is probably going to need to assess. So back on July 7th, Mr. Halderson made contact with the Dane County Sheriff's Department reporting that his parents were missing. In that contact, Mr. Halderson made a great deal of statements indicating where he thought his parents were, sending police essentially on a wild goose chase throughout the state of Wisconsin, looking for them with an unidentified couple. He essentially told the police a web of lies regarding things they were packing, items they were taking or not taking, even indicating that there were messages between him and his parents while they were gone. That all, he alleged, occurred on the 2nd of July. Eventually, Mr. Halderson, obviously on the 7th, then reports his parents missing after they've been gone for 5 days at that point, and an investigation is started. In working on that investigation, police made contact with a great deal of people who had contact with Mr. Halderson in that time period between the 2nd of July, which is the last known time anyone has seen Mr. Halderson's parents, and through the day that they were making that contact. A witness that personally knows Mr. Halderson and has seen him on many occasions, who lives in rural Dane County, reported seeing Mr. Halderson's vehicle with him in it, parked in a kind of an odd location near a wood line on their rural property. She did report that to police when they were speaking to her. That reported date that Mr. Halderson was at her property was on July 5th, so 3 days after his parents reportedly had left for this cabin. Police were able to search the wood line by this, where the car was parked, where he was seen walking out of the woods and getting in the car, and they did find the remains of Mr. Halderson's father. The remains, unfortunately, have been dismembered. We only found portions of Mr. Halderson. The medical examiner has positively identified the remains as, in fact, being Mr. Halderson's father. In performing an autopsy of what was available, they were also able to confirm that the cause of death was homicidal violence by gunshots. So at this point, we have an extremely complex investigation. We have a defendant who had 6 days essentially to hide evidence of this crime and lied to police in the course of this missing persons investigation, which he instigated. He has lied dozens of times in the course of this investigation. He is now seen leaving the area in which the dismembered remains of his father were found with gunshot wounds. And police are obviously still engaged in an extremely broad search for the remains of his father and of course, his mother. She still remains a missing person. So for those reasons, obviously, the state is likely to file additional charges in the coming days. However, it's very early in this investigation, so we're asking for high cash bail and for us to readdress this on Thursday. Thank you.
Attorney Doral.
Thank you, Your Honor. This may be a unique situation, as Deputy District Attorney Brown states, but there is no unique situation exception to the requirement that if you're going to hold someone in custody without charges, either without bail or with a high amount of cash bail, charges need to be filed. Mr. Halderson has been in custody now since last Thursday, July 8th, 2021. He appears here today without a single charge levied against him formally in court. And the prosecution is saying they can't possibly have a charge ready until Thursday, which will be 1 full week since his arrest and detention. What doesn't make sense is how we can hold people based on a long narration of evidence that the state believes they have, that they simply could have reduced to writing in a criminal complaint and actually charge someone with some crime. It may not ultimately be the exact crimes that the state will pursue one direction or another, but we don't detain people without charges being filed. It's sort of a bedrock of what we do in the United States, under Riverside, under the Constitution, under many of our understandings about how our legal system works. Interestingly enough, in this case as well, the charge that Mr. Halderson was booked into the jail on last Thursday, a PSA was done, which shows that he has very little risk of non-appearance. And I understand that charge was more of a lying to the police type charge, and now we're talking about a homicide charge. But I can confirm that my client has no criminal record. He's a lifelong resident of the state of Wisconsin. He's an Eagle Scout. There's no indication that he would flee whatsoever. There are programs available, such as electronic monitoring and things of that nature, other conditions of bail, if the state is worried. And honestly, if the state is so worried about him and needs $1 million cash bail, then they should be required to produce a criminal complaint. I'd ask that you release Mr. Halderson today without having any cash bail required because of that failure to comply with charging him and given his personalized circumstances as they relate to bail. Thank you.
Attorney Brown, any response?
Sure. I mean, at first, as to the PSI, I would ask that you discount that entirely. I mean, the PSI is a tool available to the court, and obviously the situation that's before the court at this time is far, far more unique than anything the PSI likely would have, or the pre-sentence report would have ever contemplated. PSA when they envisioned that tool. Here, Mr. Halderson was engaged in roughly a week of covering up this crime. It is not surprising that it's taking an extremely long time to conduct this investigation. He may very well be charged with homicide sooner than Thursday. We are trying to, as hard as we can, to get the personnel available to conduct this investigation. What we do know is that it was Mr. Halderson that delayed reporting anyone missing in this case. And in fact, he was around his parents following the date that they supposedly left for up north. It does not appear that his parents ever left this county. All indications are is that at least Mr. Halderson, the victim in this case, was killed shortly after that time. Mr. Halderson delayed for 6 days, ultimately, in having abilities to hide evidence, and he was hiding evidence in this case. Around the area where the portion of Mr. Halderson's body was found that was dismembered, police found a tarp that it was wrapped in, covered in blood. Here, Mr. Halderson is believed to have asked others for cleaning products in trying to clean up the crime scenes here. Again, it's a unique situation, and I don't discount what Attorney Dorrell says, in which we usually don't. We have bail hearings where we hold people on extremely high cash bail. However, there is a process under Riverside for the court to find probable cause and appreciate the gravity and the uniqueness of this situation when looking at Mr. Halderson's specific case. He has been in custody since last week. It is a number of days. The state is hopeful to get a criminal complaint together in conjunction with working with police in the coming days. However, it's important to note that as of today, Mr. Halderson's mother still remains a missing person. No, I'm not indicating any remains have been found of her at this point. But what we do have is Mr. Halderson leaving a wood line where the remains of his father were found with gunshots and it's been dismembered. Yet he had told police numerous times that that person was up north or that person was in a car with these random strangers and had been cleaning up a crime scene for 6 days. So I don't believe it's an unreasonable request. I'll concede it as a unique request, but I don't believe it's an unreasonable request.
Does the state have any evidence that Mr. Halderson had been preparing to or attempting to leave the area prior to his arrest?
Prior to his arrest, no. I do have evidence that Mr. Halderson was traveling throughout the area to rural areas of Wisconsin in the time period prior to his arrest. I don't know what he was doing there, but obviously that's of significant concern and interest to the state at this point.
Attorney Dorrell, anything else?
I would just reiterate that there is no exception to bringing charges because the state believes that the person that committed the crime may have spent some time either committing it or cleaning up the crime as they allege. I mean, the rules are the rules for holding people in custody. And I simply ask that they be enforced in favor of my client today.
All right, thank you. Well, I would agree that it's an unusual request, seeking a significant cash bond, especially in a situation where no complaint has yet been filed. The PC affidavit suggests the possibility of a number of different potential charges, I suppose. For instance, the law enforcement agency leading the investigation suggests the possibility of providing false information in a missing persons case. The allegations and some of the information raised by Attorney Brown suggests the charge potentially of mutilation of a corpse, or even something maybe more serious as suggested, whether it be individually or as party to the crime of some form of conduct that led to the death of another. So I certainly understand the state's position, wanting some significant cash bond, but it's hard for me to ignore a number of factors that I think have to be considered at any bond, whether there's a complaint or just, in this case, the probable cause statement. Number one is the fact that there isn't a charging document. I think Attorney Dorrell is correct that that's a significant consideration in setting bond. Mr. Halderson, from all indications, and I haven't heard anything to the contrary, has led a fairly exemplary life, accomplishing the rank of Eagle Scout, no record to speak of, a lifelong resident. Certainly factors to consider when addressing bond in most cases. And no evidence that he is a flight risk, other than maybe the charge, which certainly is a significant factor in, if the charge were a lower level felony versus a life crime. So certainly that would have a different impact on, at least on my, or at least on the court's perspective in setting bond. So I certainly don't believe that it would be appropriate to set such a substantial bond in such a case where there are still so many different unknowns. Even if the state were able to move as quickly as suggested, and I have no reason to doubt that they may be able to do so, certainly they have evidence of a death of a body. There is some very strong circumstantial evidence that it's possible Mr. Halderson might have been involved. Whether others are involved, that may be what the investigation will show as well. But I can't ignore all of those all of those potential circumstantially supported charges from the probable cause statement. So I think some cash is necessary just to ensure the lack of flight, recognizing that I don't think the state at this point has enough to suggest as a substantial cash bond. I'm going to order a $10,000 cash bond in this matter. And it can be reviewed. If you think you can get something as quickly as Thursday, we can review it on Thursday. Or if you want to review it next Monday, I'm happy to add it to the Monday calendar as well.
You can put it on the Thursday calendar.
Thursday?
We may take other action, but yes, Thursday would be fine. As conditions of bail, because I didn't address it, the address the defendant gave is an active crime scene. He can't go back there. He's not allowed. The police won't let him in. So he needs to provide another address, but I would ask that he be outfitted with a GPS monitor and be confined 24/7 to whatever address he gives.
Okay. I think it's fair to ask that Mr. Halderson provide an address within 24 hours of his release. I'll order pretrial services as far as a GPS monitor. I'm disinclined to order that Mr. Halderson be essentially under home arrest at this point, but I'll order that he not leave the jurisdiction, not leave Dane County. Okay. And so the restrictions on the GPS monitor would be to monitor his remaining within Dane County. All right. And then the matter will be adjourned to Thursday. And it looks like that will be provided, that information will be provided to you, Mr. Halderson, as well. Anything else, Attorney Dorrell, Attorney Brown?
No, thank you.
And I'll just note, even though we've adjourned the matter till Thursday, I suspect the state will file charges at this point.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that. Record's
Thank you.
closed.